started with my testimony of 1973, how that I believe with all my heart that's where we should stay. In the simplicity of this, we know that Christ is risen, and sharing with other people. I'm going to give you, in conclusion, a story. Jesus always told stories to help people arrive at a point. This culminates all I'm trying to say today. It ties everything together. And I'm glad the story has the participants in it. They're only second graders. Only second graders. Jesus said we should be as little children, right? I want to tell you about a revelation of Christ and Easter and the empty tomb that took place in the second grade class in the schoolroom somewhere. I don't know. The names have been changed. James Dobson sent out this magazine, and in there I found this article, and I said, Lord, that's exactly what I need to say this morning. If you don't mind, I'd like to read some of it because I haven't memorized it. But it says, Jeremy was born with a twisted body and a slow mind. At the age of 12, he was still in the second grade, seemingly unable to learn. His teacher, Doris Miller, often became exasperated with him. He would squirm in his seat, drool, and make grunting noises. Now, any teacher realizes that's quite a problem. At other times, he spoke clearly and distinctly as if a spot of light had penetrated the darkness of his brain. Most of the time, however, Jeremy irritated the teacher. One day she called his parents and asked them to come to St. Teresa's for a consultation. And as she talked with the parents, she realized that this Jeremy was their only child. Not only did he have a learning impairment, but he had a terminal illness. And the mother wept and said, I don't know where else we could take him. I don't know what else we can do. 1973, I said things like that. 72, I said things like that. 71, 70. I didn't know what to do. Didn't have the foggiest idea. A lot of you are in the same boat. And Doris, the teacher, thought to herself, after all, he's their only child. But it didn't seem fair to keep him in her class. She had 18 other youngsters to teach, and Jeremy was a distraction. Furthermore, he would never learn to read and write. Why waste any more time trying? She pondered the situation. Guilt washed over her, and, oh God, she said out loud, here I am complaining when my problems are nothing compared to that poor family. Please help me to be more patient with Jeremy. From that day on, she tried very hard to ignore Jeremy's noises and his blank stares. And then one day, he limped to her desk, dragging his bad leg behind him. I love you, Miss Miller. And he said it loud enough for the whole class to hear. The other students snickered, and Doris, her face turned red, and she stammered, well, that's very nice, Jeremy. Now please take your seat. Spring came, and the children talked excitedly about the coming of Easter. And Doris told them the story of Jesus. And then to emphasize the idea of new life springing forth, she gave each of the children a large plastic egg. Now she said to them, I want you to take this home and bring it back tomorrow with something inside that shows new life. Do you understand? Oh, yes, Mrs. Miller, all the children responded enthusiastically, all except Jeremy. He just listened very intently, and his eyes never left her face. He didn't even make an unusual noise. He just stared at her and never responded. The next morning, 19 children came to school laughing and talking as they placed their eggs in the large wicker basket on Miss Miller's desk. And the first egg, Doris found a flower, and the little girl said, oh, yes, that's my flower. It's a sign of new life. Mrs. Miller said, that's right. The flower is a sign of new life. The next egg contained a plastic butterfly, which looked very real, and Doris held it up and said, we all know that a caterpillar changes and grows into a beautiful butterfly. Yes, that's new life too. And little Judy smiled proudly and said, Mrs. Miller, that one's mine. Next, Doris found a rock with moss on it in the egg, and she explained that moss too showed life. And Billy spoke up from the back of the classroom, my daddy helped me. Then Doris opened the fourth egg and she gasped. The egg was empty. Surely It must be Jeremy's, she thought. She had tried to call the house where Jeremy lived and tell the parents what Jeremy was to do with the egg, but she had forgotten and hadn't gotten through to the parents, and now she felt miserable because she didn't want to embarrass Jeremy. If only she had not forgotten to get a hold of the parents. Suddenly, Jeremy spoke up as Doris held the empty egg. Said, "Miss Miller, aren't you going to talk about my egg?" Flustered, Doris replied, but Jeremy, your egg is empty. He looked into her eyes and said softly, "Yes, but Jesus' tomb was empty, too." Time seemed to stand still in the class. And when Doris could speak again, she said, "Jeremy, do you know why the tomb was empty?" "Oh, yes. Something had happened to Jeremy that happened to me. Though I wasn't 12 years old, and though I could probably think better than Jeremy could, all I ever needed to know in this life was that the tomb is empty. And everything else is nice, but sometimes everything else gets in the way." "Oh, yes," Jeremy said. "Jesus was killed and put in there. Then his father raised him up." I just wonder if that 12-year-old boy with that terminal illness said, "I'm so glad the tomb's empty. I'm so glad there's a new life somewhere, that I don't have to stay like this all my life. I'm glad the tomb's empty this morning." I think it's the greatest revelation to men, to women, to people everywhere. The tomb's empty. There's a better life this side of glory and in the next life. When people ask me, "Brother Mike, why do these things happen? Why is there tragedy and crisis?" I don't know, but if you knew more about Jesus, it'd answer all your problems. Someday all the wrongs are going to be righted. Jeremy said, I know that his father raised him up. And then the recess bell rang while the children excitedly ran out to the schoolyard. And Doris stayed behind in the class and just cried. The cold inside of her melted completely away. 3 months later, Jeremy died. And people who came to pay their respects at the funeral home had quite a shock when they came into the funeral home, because a group of second graders had had a revelation of what Easter's all about. And on top of his casket there were 19 plastic eggs, and every one of them were empty. And in his dying, he told a story that needs to be told over and over again. The tomb is empty. Whatever object's in your way, I know there's a hand of love that can touch you today